Picture this for a second. Weeks, maybe even months of total quiet pass you by, and then your phone suddenly lights up out of nowhere. A single notification slides across your screen. One short message, one familiar name. The same person who once drained your emotions dry is suddenly standing at the door again, quietly asking for entry into your world. Before you type back, before feelings sweep you off your feet, there is something you really need to see clearly right now. Their message is not random, their return is not accidental, and the way you choose to respond at this exact moment can completely reshape everything that comes next. What unfolds from here might genuinely surprise you. Stay with me here, because this next part really matters. If you have ever had somebody vanish from your life and then stroll back in like nothing ever changed, lean in closely. Understanding this single moment can save you from months, maybe even years of emotional confusion and pain. When a person like this finally pings you after a long stretch of silence, the very first thing you need to understand is this. They are not coming back because they suddenly realized your worth. They are not reaching out because they had some deep emotional breakthrough overnight. And they are absolutely not returning because they somehow transformed into a healthier, more aware version of themselves. In most situations, this kind of person reappears because they need something from you. What they need is a refill, a fresh hit of supply. That refill can take many different shapes. It might be your attention, your validation, your admiration, your emotional reaction, your sympathy, your curiosity, or even just the quiet comfort of knowing the door is still unlocked whenever they choose to walk through it. Their silence was never truly about giving you peace, and their reappearance is not proof of growth or change. Their behavior runs on their own internal needs, not on any real care for your emotional well-being. People like this often move in repeating emotional loops, and silence is one part of that loop. When one source of attention stops feeding them, when their life starts feeling flat or dull, when they lose their grip somewhere else in their world, or when their current supply stops being interesting, they begin to look backward. They revisit people they once had a powerful emotional grip on. Not because of love, not because of regret. They do it because they want to find out who is still available emotionally. This is exactly why their message so often feels strange or completely out of nowhere. It can land at odd hours. Sometimes it shows up right when you are finally starting to breathe again. Sometimes it appears precisely when you have shifted your focus away from them. It can even feel like they somehow sense when your emotional distance starts to grow. In a way, they are unusually tuned in to shifts in attention and attachment. Not in a healthy way, in a self-serving, calculating way. They usually do not return because they miss you as a person. They return because they miss what they once pulled out of you. They miss the access. They miss the steady stream of validation. They miss the feeling of influence and control they once had over your emotions. What has to be understood very clearly here is that this return is often a transaction at its core. They are silently checking whether emotional access is still available to them. If you respond warmly, they receive supply. If you respond with anger, they still receive supply. Even a cold or casual reply can quietly tell them that the connection is not fully closed. To them, every reaction you give carries value. Your attention becomes a kind of currency. And that is exactly why they often come back when they feel that currency starting to slip away from their hands. Their earlier silence fits into the same exact pattern. When they disappear, it is usually because their attention has drifted somewhere else. Maybe another source of validation became more appealing to them. Maybe they got distracted by their own life for a while. Or maybe they used silence itself as a tool to regain control and stir up emotional doubt inside you. No matter the reason, the silence usually serves their interests in some way. And when that silence stops being useful for them, they walk right back in. Their timing is rarely accidental. They may reach out during moments when you are emotionally exposed or vulnerable, during meaningful personal dates you share, or right when your confidence is starting to rebuild. People like this often feel threatened when they sense they are losing psychological influence over someone they once had clear access to. So when they show up again, it is usually driven by self-interest, not by emotional responsibility or genuine connection. This is where so many people get confused, because the message itself often does not look harmful on the surface. In fact, it can come across as kind, soft, even apologetic. But what matters most is not just the surface message. It is what sits quietly underneath. When someone like this contacts you after silence, the message is rarely spontaneous or unplanned. Most of the time, it is calculated, intentional, and carefully shaped in a way designed to pull a reaction out of you. They are observing your emotional state the whole time. They want to know if you still care. They want to see if you still respond emotionally to them. They want to measure whether you are still reachable on a deep feeling level. Every single message they send carries some level of intention. A simple hey or a how are you can be a quiet test to see if you will carry the emotional weight of reopening the conversation. A nostalgic line might be used to see if old memories still pull at your heart. A vulnerable message like, I really needed to talk to you, can be designed to test whether you will still put their needs ahead of your own boundaries. Very little of what they do is truly random. People like this often remember emotional patterns with scary accuracy. Over time, your reactions become part of their internal map. They learn what softened you. They learn what created guilt. They learn what made you stay longer than you should have. They learn what made you explain yourself, chase closure, or re-engage emotionally, even after stepping away. The message itself becomes a quiet psychological tool. The goal is not always full reconnection. The goal is information. They want to know if you are still emotionally affected. They want to know if you still think about them behind closed doors. They want to see if silence actually caused you pain. They want to test whether access still exists even after all this time. Even your hesitation gives them data. A fast reply might signal emotional availability on your end. A long emotional explanation may signal lingering attachment. Even anger can signal that they still hold emotional importance inside your inner world. Every single reaction you give communicates something. This is exactly why their messages often carry hidden emotional layers underneath the surface. The words may look simple, even innocent, but underneath they are often carefully built to reopen old emotional roles you used to play. They might bring up shared memories. They might quietly mirror your old communication style. They might suddenly sound warm, caring, nostalgic, deeply reflective. But these are often not signs of real emotional depth. They are triggers meant to reactivate familiarity and attachment inside you. In many cases, silence ends the moment they realize they need something from you again. Attention, validation, reassurance, emotional access. And the message they send is the very first move in checking whether that access is still quietly available. What matters most to them is not the actual depth of your emotions. What matters most is whether they can still steer and shape your emotions. That is exactly why their outreach often feels so emotionally confusing. One moment, their message looks caring and thoughtful. The next moment, it feels distant, inconsistent, or subtly manipulative without you being able to explain it. Their communication centers on their own needs, not on emotional honesty or respect for yours. Once you see this repeating pattern, the whole picture starts to shift in front of your eyes. When someone like this reaches out after a long stretch of silence, your first response becomes incredibly significant. People with this behavioral pattern tend to watch emotional reactions very closely. In a way, they observe emotions like a system of patterns being constantly tested and analyzed. They notice timing, tone, vulnerability, hesitation, and tiny emotional openings. Your initial reply often reveals far more than you might think, whether your response is long or short, emotional or perfectly neutral, immediate or deliberately delayed. It all gets read and quietly assessed by them. If you respond instantly, they may assume you are still emotionally reachable. If you respond with anger, they may still read that as deep involvement. If you respond with sadness, softness, or emotional openness, they may see a clear opening to steer the tone and direction of the next conversation. Even neutral replies can carry real meaning if they include explanation, emotional context, or any sign of openness. This is also why these individuals often pick the exact moment to reach out very carefully. They understand the heavy psychological impact of an unexpected reappearance. They know many people react emotionally before they engage logically. They often lean on emotional reflexes rather than calm, measured thinking. They may expect memories, loneliness, pain, confusion, or quiet hope to respond faster than your personal boundaries normally would allow. When your reaction shows that they still affect your emotional state, they quietly gain a sense of control and confidence. It tells them emotional access might still be available, even after all this distance. One crucial point to understand here is that they often respond far more to your behavior than to your actual words alone. A person can keep saying, "I am done, I am finished, I am out." But if their behavior still shows deep emotional reactivity, it can quietly point to the exact opposite of what they are trying to say. Your reaction often ends up guiding their very next move. If you sound hurt, they may quickly shift into sympathy and softness. If you sound angry, they may suddenly become the misunderstood one. If you sound hopeful, they may respond with warmth, affection, or quiet encouragement. If you sound guilty, they may apply more emotional pressure or persistence. In many ways, your emotional reaction becomes their moving reference point for every step they take next. This is exactly why emotional calm matters so incredibly much. A steady, neutral response disrupts the expected pattern completely. A delayed reply, a controlled tone, or even total non-response creates genuine uncertainty for them. And uncertainty is something they tend to struggle deeply with because it weakens their sense of influence over you. A calm or minimal reply removes the emotional reaction they are actively fishing for. It interrupts the script they expected to continue running. At that exact moment, their confidence in emotional access begins to quietly crack. When individuals like this return after a long silence, their tone is often very carefully chosen in advance. They rarely open in an aggressive or harsh way. Instead, they usually approach you through familiarity, warmth, nostalgia, or emotional softness. These approaches are specifically designed to drop your emotional defenses fast, before you even realize what is happening. They may suddenly appear kind, thoughtful, deeply reflective, concerned, or emotionally open in a way they never were before. They may present themselves as stressed, confused, lonely, overwhelmed, or emotionally unstable in that precise moment. Both approaches often serve the very same underlying goal. The aim is to lower your guard quickly and quietly. Softness can help you forget the heavy weight of past distance. Vulnerability can pull hard on your empathy. And empathy is something they often know exactly how to switch on whenever it serves their needs. In some cases, what looks like vulnerability may not actually be emotional truth. It may function as a quiet method of influence instead. This matters deeply because emotional distance often brings real clarity with it. When time passes and space is genuinely created, emotional noise begins to fade away. Thinking gets sharper and clearer. Emotional intensity starts to reduce. Confidence slowly returns to your voice and your choices. At the same time, individuals like this often notice when emotional distance is quietly growing on your end. And when they sense their grip softening, they tend to adjust their approach fast. They may suddenly become softer, more understanding, more reflective, more emotionally open than ever before. This shift can spark genuine conflict inside you. It may raise heavy questions like whether they have really changed this time or whether things could finally be different now. Now, this is exactly where confusion often takes its strongest hold, because temporary softness is sometimes mistaken for lasting change. But real emotional growth is steady and consistent over a long stretch of time. Behavior that only shifts when access feels at risk is not the same as a real, stable transformation. Their emotional warmth can intensify whenever they fear losing access to you. Their vulnerability may grow louder when reassurance is urgently needed. Their emotional openness can appear out of nowhere when they sense distance creeping in for real. This is exactly why their messages can sometimes feel highly personal or even specifically targeted toward you. It can feel like they remember exactly what once moved you emotionally, down to the smallest detail. In many cases, they really do remember every bit of it. They remember what softened your boundaries in seconds. They remember what made you forgive quickly without proper thought. They remember what kept you emotionally engaged during the hardest patches of your life. They remember the emotional language that once sparked hope, comfort, or deep closeness between you. And they use that stored information very strategically. Not always for healing, quite often for renewed access. The intention behind that sudden warmth is not always real connection. It is often quiet re-engagement dressed up as something softer. Many people fall back into old painful loops because they mistake temporary emotional softness for genuine long-term change. Patterns eventually reveal the truth about what is really happening. When you do not respond at all after their return, a different psychological process begins for them. Silence disrupts the entire expected emotional system they were counting on. Individuals who rely heavily on emotional reactions begin to lose their reference point. Both positive and negative reactions usually serve them in some subtle way. Anger, sadness, longing, explanation, or emotional engagement all give them something to interpret and learn from. Silence removes that feedback entirely. And when there is no emotional engagement coming back, their uncertainty starts to grow louder inside them. This lack of feedback can stir up real discomfort for them because the expected emotional loop suddenly breaks apart. Choosing not to respond is not about proving anything to anyone. It is about removing the emotional access they keep reaching for. In many difficult situations, silence becomes an incredibly strong form of boundary because it simply does not feed their emotional cycles anymore. It communicates without a single word that your emotional energy is no longer being directed toward that connection at all. It shows clearly that your personal peace is no longer dependent on their presence or their absence in your life. This can be genuinely hard for individuals who rely on emotional influence because your silence removes their sense of impact on you. It introduces deep uncertainty about their relevance and emotional position in your world. At the same time, silence also quietly protects your internal clarity. Even tiny interactions can reopen old emotional confusion at any time. A single message can slowly drag old patterns back into your life. A polite reply can quietly turn into renewed emotional engagement. A short conversation can restart a painful cycle that once felt impossible to fully exit. Silence prevents that entire cycle from restarting in the first place. It creates space for you to observe rather than react on instinct. It allows emotional stability to return without outside interference. It protects your nervous system from unnecessary emotional turbulence. It opens up a quiet space where real clarity can slowly return to you. And most importantly, silence becomes a boundary that does not require any justification or long explanation from you. You are never obligated to hand emotional access to someone who repeatedly disrupted your peace and your sense of self. What makes silence so powerful at the end is that it gets read very differently depending on the emotional maturity of the person on the other end. A balanced, emotionally healthy person may see your silence as simple space, natural closure, or quiet disinterest. But individuals with strong manipulative tendencies often read your silence as a direct loss of control. This shift in their reading can lead them to increase contact attempts, shift their emotional tone quickly, or amplify their efforts to pull you back into the old pattern. These reactions often reveal far more than their carefully chosen words ever did. Because if their intention had been truly respectful from the start, they would have respected your distance and kept walking. When there is heavy persistence despite your silence, it almost always signals deep emotional self-interest rather than any genuine understanding of what you are going through. That is exactly why silence can expose their true intent very quickly. It shows their underlying motivation clearly without needing confrontation or long explanations from you. Although silence may feel uncomfortable or strange at first, it tends to support real healing far more than continued emotional engagement ever does. Real recovery requires genuine distance from repeated emotional disturbance, and silence naturally builds that protective distance for you. There are situations, of course, where complete silence is just not realistic or possible. Some people share important responsibilities, children, workplaces, or unavoidable contact that you cannot simply cut off. In those unavoidable cases, emotional neutrality itself becomes an incredibly strong form of protection. Emotional neutrality means responding without heavy emotional intensity, without opening up with vulnerability, without displaying visible anger, and without emotional storytelling that quietly reopens attachment or old wounds. Individuals with manipulative patterns tend to observe emotional energy far more carefully than they observe actual words. They pay close attention to tone, urgency, emotional openness, and your overall psychological availability in the moment. Neutral, business-like communication gives them very little material to work with, and that immediately shifts the entire dynamic in your favor. Neutrality is not emotional coldness, it is not silent punishment, it is emotional stability, plain and simple, and it works.